Well, welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I'm your host. And today, a discretionary warning. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about how to talk to your kids about sex. The conversation will be explicit at times, and so if you've normally got young ears in the car with you, you may not want to have this entire conversation run through in front of them. If you've got some ears who may be a little bit sensitive to this topic in particular, based on their story or events in their lives, you may want to just be careful in how you allow this episode to kind of air out. So I will also say, for those of us who may have checkered past or stories when it comes to sex or sexual trauma, you may just want to use discretion as you parse through this episode as well. But we are going to discuss how to talk to your kids about sex, which is a obviously necessary conversation. And we do so with Dr. Katherine Blackney, who's a licensed sexual therapist, also does family therapy as well as general counseling. And so incredible person, somebody who gives this talk to parent groups all over the place every year. And so she's also a parent herself, and we'll talk more about her specifically once the episode is starting off. But wanted to let you know on the front end, this conversation is loaded, and it's got some great content for you to devour, but there's also just a lot to consider as you have this conversation. My encouragement to you would be definitely sit down with a pad of paper, sit down with your parenting partner, your spouse, or whoever it is that you are in this battle with, and take notes, have conversations, pause the conversation when necessary to explore more about what that means for you or your family in particular, or your kids that you've got care for. But definitely don't miss this conversation because it is a necessary one. And Dr. Blackney walks through this content in a way that is so practical and so helpful. If I could just plead with everybody listening to share this episode with other parents you know who are wanting to have this conversation, needing to have the conversation, and maybe most helpfully, folks you know that want to have kids in the future. Go ahead and shoot them this episode now. The better your pre-information can be when you're beginning this parenting journey, the better you can walk through these early years of parenting. And so super excited for all of you to listen to this episode today. Grab some paper, grab a pen, maybe some headphones instead of the loudspeakers in the house. And please enjoy our episode about sex with Dr. Katherine Blackney. All right, well, we are here today with Dr. Katherine Blackney. Katherine is a counseling psychologist and a clinical sex therapist here in Memphis, Tennessee. And she's going to talk with us today about everything from healthy sexuality to how to talk with your kids about sex. This is one of those topics that obviously carries so much baggage with it. And so we're going to have some caveats kind of in the beginning and talk. But as we talked off air before recording, one of the things that Katherine emphasized, we contacted her about talking with your kids about sex and how to walk through that and some of the layers that come with that through adoption and foster care and different scenarios you might be in as a parent or caregiver. And she said, now hold on now. We got to talk about ourselves first. And if you've been following along with the ETC podcast, that's obviously been a theme of a lot of our guests, is that in order for you to offer a healthy parenting regimen to your kids, you've got to be a healthy parent. And so we are going to start off talking about that today. But Katherine, thank you for joining us. We're so excited that you're here with us today.
I am so excited. I'm incredibly humbled with this privilege. It is such an honor to come and to speak. I've always desired to be able to reach more people than just one or two clients an hour. And so this actually just gives me so much joy to be present with y'all and to be able to speak into people's lives in this season. So thanks for having me.
We've also got Tana Ottinger with us from ETC. And Tana, glad you're with us on the show today.
Thank you so much. Katherine, we're happy you're here. Excited to dive in.
Awesome. So this will probably be split into several episodes today as we have this conversation, because it is definitely not a 20-minute conversation one time. So just know we'll probably have a series that comes out of this conversation with Katherine. But so glad that you're here. So why don't we jump right in? We mentioned in the beginning that you did give the caveat about needing to talk about healthy individual sexuality first before we look into talking with your kids about it. Will you just kind of start there and start walking us through that idea?
Absolutely. Well, I want to give just a few caveats because this is such a sacred topic of sexuality, of our own sexuality, but then also how do we model this to our kids and in our relationships. I just want people to know that some of this material could be triggering, some of it could be just difficult to digest and to understand and to process. So I really want you to be mindful of what your needs are. And I think that is important as you're traveling through this podcast, is to understand when you need to come up for air, when you need to maybe step away, and then also some self-care strategies for afterwards because of maybe some of the stuff that can come up. Like I said earlier, this is such sacred material that I do not tread on this lightly at all. It's something that I feel a weight of importance, and I approach this topic in that way. So I want you to really be seen and be known and be loved by me. And that's really important. And in this podcast, I want y'all to understand that I might be using partners, I might be using spouses, I might be using different language. I might be talking about relationships, but I don't want those that are widowed or single or caretakers at an older age to ever feel unseen by me. So just please know my heart, and please know that I just want you to feel seen and known by me. So that would be the caveats prior to.
It's great. Great.
So let me kind of jump into, in terms of how do we express healthy sexuality to our children? There's so many different topics. It really does come down to, do we have a healthy foundation for modeling to our kids? So my first encouragement would be for you to look at your own sexual history, how you view sexuality, how you view the different topics that relate to sexual topics, and really find comfort and find a firm foundation for how you are, because that is going to be presented to your kids. And so if there's some unresolved sexual trauma, sexual abuse, sexual dysfunction in your past or present, it really would be important for you to find that space to unpack and receive healing from that, so that you can really set forth to provide a healthy view for your kids.
And Kat, would you say the best place to start with that? Like if you're hearing this and you're starting to sweat and going, oh no, I think that might be me. Like what's the best way for somebody to start that conversation? Would it be reaching out to a counselor, to a friend? I mean, what level of like engagement does that need to be starting out?
I think reaching out to a therapist would be super helpful, because that's for you, and that gives you a safe space and an objective space to be present and to feel received and to feel encouraged and to help process with a professional. I also think it's important to talk to your friends, because my hope is that will encourage your friends to maybe look at their own issues as you're in preparation for how to talk to your kids. So I would say both. I think sometimes reaching out to a professional would be one of the safest and kind of secure manner.
Yeah, that's really good. Also, probably the person who's got the highest capacity to really walk through the depth of your story, right? And kind of give some tools on the other side of that. And
and hold space for that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you're now a healthy sexual individual and you're ready to tackle this conversation. What would be your next step to kind of look through?
So my next step would then be to look at your relationship. And again, I want my single parents to hear me and to feel seen by me. So for this little episode part, I'm going to talk about being in a relationship. When you're in a relationship, you are communicating to your children really at birth. And people say, goodness, when do we start having the conversation? And the Penners I studied under from California, they say, you start teaching healthy sexuality at birth. All the parts are present when they're born, and so you start talking about it, right?
Now that is really interesting. So I know that when I heard this conversation from you the first time, the Southern Baptist in me went, what? Like, no way. Absolutely not will I start doing that at birth. You are crazy. So how in the world does that conversation start from birth?
Right. So it starts in your relationship. All right. It starts in the way you communicate with your partner, the way y'all show affection or not, and the way that there's kind of an exercise of power. So let me flesh this out into an experiential example.
That's great.
So let's say the man comes home from work and the woman's in the kitchen getting everything ready, and the man comes over and maybe pinches her booty or kind of, does a little flirtatiousness, and the woman swats his hand away and says, no, not now. Right there, children are exposed to sex is something the man pursues and the woman is embarrassed by.
Oh, man.
Okay. So right there, you've already communicated healthy sexuality or not. You've communicated there's something about that. And so I encourage my couples to be affectionate, but not so much that it's like, get a room. This is embarrassing, right? But I don't want you to also never sit by each other on the couch or never have a passionate kiss or a hug. Like, that is all exhibiting healthy sexuality to your kids. So that's how it starts at birth.
Yeah. Got it. Awesome. And then obviously that's continuing on, the modeling in your own relationship. And then, one of the things that you talked about before is being very intentional as your kids are learning to talk and you're just identifying like, yeah, that's your nose and that's your eye, that's your ear, using actual body part names for private parts. And will you talk through that and why that's important?
Absolutely. So another thing I was thinking about is, another way we teach healthy sexuality with our kids is in like the toys that they play with. Like, they learn very early on about their masculine and feminine, the genders, the roles that they play, the way you speak to them. Sometimes we speak harsher to boys than we do to girls. Well, right there, that is, again, communicating about their gender. And so it's interesting. We also talk about how you dress them. And what's really funny is my husband laughs because he is not from the South. And so when I put my boys in an apron, it's not a dress, it's called an apron. And the buttons are on the other side. So it's a masculine dress,
Is that what it's called? It's a masculine dress, Katherine. That's what we're saying? Okay.
It's called an apron, and that's what boys wear.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Can I just interrupt for a second? Can we just go on a rabbit trail? I saw on social media, somebody posted a picture, I saw it yesterday or something, and it was adult Southern smocked clothing for a whole. Did you see it?
I saw that. It was awesome.
It was like man jumpers. Like the men were wearing the full smocked thing, and somebody.
They're John Johns.
Thank you. See, I couldn't find the word John Johns, and they were like, "So I don't understand the John Johns from the South, but apparently the men can get them too." So anyway,
that's a no-no for me. That's a no-no. Yeah.
No.
And
when I put my boys in a bubble, like my husband's like, it looks like a teardrop, a big giant teardrop. And so the material does say like the way you dress them, but you gotta be a little cautious in the South. So,
Sure.
But yeah, so going to naming the genitals, I have had so many people say, well, if I tell Johnny that his penis is a penis, he's going to go to school and tell his friend that I have a penis. And then that mother's going to call me. And that's when I mean, guarantee every talk I have somebody ask this question. And I love it. I so appreciate the question, because I look at that individual and say, it seems like this is more of an issue for you, that you're uncomfortable with the name. Because this is a God-given part. And when we have silly names for it, when we have slang words for it, we're really objectifying that part of ourselves, but we're also making it separate than our bodies. And so there's the other day I was snuggling with my older boys, and my husband was snuggling with the other. They share a room, and my older son was like, "Do we always have to call a penis a penis?" I mean, there's some perks of having a mom as a sex therapist, but then they're all, And he's like, "Do we always have to call it a penis?" And I was like, "Well, what else would you want to call it?" He's like a handle, a little handle, like a bell. And I was like, So I said, well, hey, there's nothing little about that bell, or there's nothing little about, and that's when my husband leaned up from the bed. He was on his phone and he looked at me and he's like, he just shook his head. Like, are you
Like, maybe there's a line. I don't know. If there's a line, maybe you crossed it. I don't know. That's amazing.
And so, but being serious, going back to the naming generals, like, they were given those names. And again, when we separate them, or, we don't call it a nosy wosy, so why do we call it names that give it more attention and that make it silly or fun to talk about when it's just a part of their body, just as important as we get excited when they're like, here's my elbow, here's my nose, and then all of a sudden we freak out when they say, here's my penis, or here's my, and it's just all part of how God created their bodies. And it's one body, not separate parts to one body.
Yeah. That's really
I
good.
love that. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of just naming what it is.
Yeah. So I've heard kind of the darker necessary explanation of that is that you also are helping when doing that, you are also helping your kids in preventing any type of abuse or violence that could be happening toward them, and being able to have those conversations. And I will say, as a result of this talk, and we heard this from you years ago, as our kids got older, as they start going to Mother's Day out, as they start going to play at friends' houses, they roll their eyes now and are like, come on, we know. But we have the conversation like, hey, your private parts are yours to they are yours, and they are nobody else's to touch or to look at. And if anybody is asking you about that, so it gives them language to be able to come back and say very specifically like, hey, actually, so-and-so did look at my penis or asked me to see my butt or whatever, my bottom. And so is there anything else to expound upon with that, or is that just also just part of the conversation?
Absolutely. It's a part of empowering your kids. I mean, it's empowering your kids that their body is designed perfectly. And so I can't tell you how many nurses and doctors have said, please, please, please educate to name the parts, because when they come talk to me and I ask them about certain things, and they have slang words or silly words, I'm not able to really get at if there has been any abuse. And so it helps just empower the child, but also give clarification if anything is happening.
Psychologically, is there also an empowerment to that you feel like it might also aid in kids feeling more confident in avoiding situations or even being able to escape sort of from situations that might be dicey in that way?
Absolutely. Yeah. And just the more that they see kind of all their parts as magnificent and wonderful and beautiful and perfect, then they're able to feel empowered. And so, like with potty training, this is a perfect example. With potty training, people say, why is potty training associated with sex, and with sexuality? And so there's a research that talks about how potty training can actually hinder or improve the feelings you have about your genitals in marriage or in your partnership later in life. And so if you potty train using kind of no boundaries, there's no limits, you don't really give any structure, then the child doesn't learn how to be modest or be open to sharing their genitals in a partnership later in life. If you potty train kind of using punishment, then children have learned they're less likely to be open and sharing their genitals in their partnership. And so the best way of potty training is with praise and reward. If you go with praise and reward, they learn that what they're doing is right and good. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad with it. They're learning about how they're, we talk about like potty training practices, right? You need to wash your hands, but your vagina and penis have no germs. They're not yucky. They're not gross.
Yeah.
And so all of that is teaching them how to be proud of themselves. And I think that empowers them for sure.
Oh, that's great. That is super helpful. I have never heard that before. Like, that is really interesting. So as you're at that potty training age, you're kind of in that area where kids are starting to talk, and now they're moving around a little bit more. And especially during the pandemic, everyone is at home more, which means that everyone is working on making sure they have a nice shirt on for their Zooms and might not be wearing pants, who knows. But, with that conversation, starts to have that conversation about what nudity in the home looks like and about, how we dress and how we cover up our private parts or don't or whatever. And will you talk about that a little bit, about the importance of having those conversations?
Sure, absolutely. So I have a lot of people ask, what about nudity in the home or bathing, opposite gender bathing together? So let me share about that. A caveat for sure is some of y'all as parents are not going to know your background history of your children. And so there's going to be a continuum of really conservative to a little bit more relaxed. And only you can figure that out and find that out based on your child's history for sure. So nudity in the home, again, that is going to be expressing healthy body image. And this is so important, especially for us women, to really express healthy body image to our children. So whereas, we don't want you to cook in the nude, right? When you're getting out of the shower, maybe not grab a towel and really wrap up really quickly, like you're ashamed of what the child could see, but just kind of calmly get out of the shower, get your towel and drape it around like it's no big thing. Again, you want them to see that I'm accepted and I've accepted my body. So nudity in the home, it does tend to be my girls tend to be a little bit more modest sooner than my boys. Okay. And I'm talking about like just in general of like all the people I've worked with, not my own children. So I think for some boys, they could run around naked till they're in their teens. And some girls learn about more modesty. Around 6 or 7, they start kind of saying, okay, there's some modesty. So I think follow the lead of your kids in terms of looking around age 6 to 7 when they start just wanting to have that privacy when they're changing, and really definitely encourage if friends are coming over or if other families are coming over, like we do, cover up and look, modest and presentable. So when I've had people ask, okay, well, when do I need to separate bathing? Because goodness gracious, it is so convenient when you can just pop all those kids in the bathtub at the same time. And I totally get that. And how we see it as like, oh, there's such an added layer of responsibility when we can't do that. So when you start seeing your children and it's more of a voyeuristic experience, when they're just kind of fixated on the genitals or talking about the genitals in the bath, that's when you get to come in. And I say you get to, not you have to. You get to come in and say, you know what, Sarah, I cannot believe this, but you're now old enough to be able to take a shower. And so you see it as a privilege. It is not a punishment. It's not like, oh, well, because y'all can't stop talking about whatever. It's really seen as a privilege.
Right.
And it's like, now you get to be taking showers, and that's a sign of getting older. And I'm so excited for you. And then you die a little bit inside because that's just going to be an added level of responsibility. But if it's presented as a privilege, I think, again, that just sets the tone for this healthy sexuality that we're trying to teach our kids.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. So if we're kind of following the timeline of kids growing up, this starts to get in that time where either you kind of have this sneaking suspicion that these conversations need to start about sex and where babies come from and all of that, or this is where you start to try to like assure yourself that, no, I don't have to have that conversation until they're married. And so it's a terrifying thing. And for all the reasons that we gave in the beginning, all the caveats that can be given, personal history, kids' history, family history, all of that, there's a lot on the plate to tackle when it comes to the conversation about sex with kids. How do we even start? What is the best starting point? And then how much do you charge us to have that conversation for us with our kids?
Absolutely. I should have like the Katherine Blackney Academy, and all these kids get to go through the academy.
Like, come on, I was just in the middle of cooking when you asked me that question. If you can just let me dial this phone number real quick and hand you the phone, Mom's going to go back to the kitchen cooking.
Yeah. You know how to get on Zoom. You're doing virtual school. Just go get on Zoom with Katherine.
I love empowering my parents. Well, before we get to that, I would say, so some people say, okay, well, I got till like what, 9, 10, and again, backing it up, and y'all have learned how, healthy sexuality starts at birth.
Yeah.
Then really the ideal teachable age to begin this dialogue in a developmentally appropriate way, which I'll talk about, is around 4 to 6.
Okay.
Y'all, this is the sweetest little spot in these people's lives, okay? And again, I don't know their history. I don't know, early exposure to any kind of sexual material, any kind of sexual experience. Your kids are going to be hypersexualized. And that's when you're going to need to tag in and find a therapist who is going to be able to walk y'all through, because they are going to be at a different level. Okay. So for those who have not been exposed to material that keeps them very fixated or obsessed about it, 4 to 6 is a great age, because they think you are masters of the universe. You can say no wrong, do no wrong. Everything you say is amazing. It is a wonderful age that we just want to bottle up, right?
Yeah.
So in talking to your kids, that's when you begin to talk about the egg and the sperm, and the egg is from the woman, the sperm is from the man, and they get together and they create a baby, and you grow a baby in your uterus, and the baby either comes out the vagina or is cut out. And so you just talk very naturally about it, right? So I was at a Thanksgiving. I was pregnant with my third. So my oldest was 4. And I was at a Thanksgiving program with my husband, and I was very pregnant. I was going to have a baby the next month. And one of the little kids in my boys' class was like, "Hey, are you pregnant?" And I said, "Yes, I have a baby in there." And my 4-year-old's like, "The baby is in the uterus." And like, he could barely even pronounce uterus. And that's again when my husband looked at me and was like, "Why? I didn't even know what a uterus was till college. No." And of course, I'm beaming with pride. I'm like, "It is in the uterus. It's not floating with food in the tummy." Like, how confusing can that be?
Yeah,
right?
no, that's true.
Okay. Yeah. So that's when you just kind of educate. There's a thick pocket that God created, which is called a uterus, and that's where the baby is. And the baby is surrounded by water, which protects it, and it gets food, and it gets air, and it gets water, and it grows and grows and grows. And then when the woman is ready, she either pushes it out her vagina or it gets cut out of her belly, depends on, and that usually satisfies them, and so that's how you
interrupt. It
Yes,
usually
please.
does, unless you have a science-minded child. And then you do have to explain the muscles that God gave the body to open the vagina up in order to have enough room for a very large baby. I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
man, my conversations have, some of them are, it's like, "I'll just take a little bit. Please stop talking. My ears are burning." And then others are like, "Hold on. I've got about 500 more questions."
And so a wonderful way is to celebrate the curiosity and say, "Gosh,
Totally.
you have these questions, and I can't wait to answer them when you get just a little bit older."
Yep.
That's good.
So absolutely. I mean, you can talk about, especially if it's a little girl who's asking, who's like, "I know what it looks down there, and that doesn't look like a baby can come out." And you can talk about the relaxin hormones that just relax that area to allow a baby to come out. I mean, it's short, direct, simple answers. And it is never the talk and walk. I'm so sorry. Don't we wish there was? Actually, I don't, because I think there's so much depth that you have every time you have these conversations with your kids. So I'm thankful it's not the talk and walk, but I am a sex therapist. So I'm an outlier, right? So yeah, that's how you begin at the 4 to 6 age, right? All right. And then you kind of transition into a little bit later. So let me talk about, again, some ways to kind of introduce sexual topics in this era before we get to puberty and testosterone entering the body, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about self-stimulation, which is a really nice word. And I'm not being nice about it, but it's a nice word for saying masturbation at a young age, okay? Self-stimulation, God gave us genitals that feel good to touch.
Yeah.
All right. So bear with me. The tip of the penis and the clitoris have the most nerve endings in any other part of their bodies, and it's simply for pleasure. So that was created at birth. Also, little boys will have an erection within 24 hours, and little girls will vaginally lubricate within 24 hours of birth. Guys, God created our bodies to produce and to exhibit and to be just the way they are. And so when it's about 50 to 80% of boys that will self-stimulate and about 50 to 60% of little girls that will self-stimulate. And I'm talking about anywhere from the age of like 4 to 6, right? So if you see a little girl hanging out underneath the bathtub faucet, or if you see her rocking back and forth on a stuffed animal, okay, she is self-stimulating. She's figuring out, oh wow, that feels really good to touch. So little boys at this age are also going to start wearing shorts and underwear, and with everything being external, it's just really easy to stimulate that area. Okay.
Yeah.
So you might see little boys, self-stimulating. Also, when they wake up and they have an erection, that's another way of kind of talking to them about, wow, isn't that magnificent? And I love hearing little kids and how they express erections, or we could really go down a rabbit hole with that, but we'll stay present. So when you see your kid self-stimulating, sometimes they're giving the physical affection that they need, they're giving it to themselves. So instead of shaming them by saying, stop that, don't do that, that's gross, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Again, you have
that's so helpful.
now encouraged them that their genitals are gross and nasty and something separate and not God-made. And so if you are having a hard time having a direct conversation about the self-stimulation, it might be good to say, hey, Micah, why don't you come sit on my lap and let me brush your hair? Let's read a book together. Maybe encourage kind of tussling the hair when you walk past them or giving them a hug. And so sometimes that's going to pacify the physical affection that they're needing, that they're giving themselves. When you see it kind of become a little bit more habitual, right? So they're not able to contain it and it's happening more often and you're uncomfortable. Yeah. It's good to give some guidelines. So the 4 things that I think are really helpful and empowering to tell kids around self-stimulation is, number 1, your genitals are special. God created them. They are part of who you are. Number 2, they feel good to touch because God created that way. And that's where the most nerve endings are in their bodies. Number 3, your genitals are private. And number 4, we don't touch them in public. So those are ways when parents can kind of have the encouragement to have that conversation to say, hey, we just need some boundaries. It's non-shaming. You're not saying don't do it, okay? Because the more you say don't do it, the more it can become secretive and actually obsessive and really damaging to their personal, spiritual, and physical well-being. So teaching those 4 principles to your kids gives them empowerment. And I guarantee they're going to be slipping into something else when you say, hey, remember, they're special, they feel good to touch, but they're private and we don't do that in public. That's giving them the boundaries of you need to be somewhere else if you're going to do that. And a lot of the kids don't want to miss out on the action that's going on present. So they'll be like, okay, and they'll move to something else. You will have some who say, okay, well, I'm going to go to my room. And that's when you just say, okay. And they're going through the guidelines of what you've put in place.
Right.
If you see that the child is having a real difficult time and it's happening at school, it's happening at grandmother's house, it's happening at friends' houses, it's happening in the same bedroom where they're sharing with another sibling, that's when you may want to reach out to somebody and say, hey, I just want to make sure that we are on par for what is healthy and what is not, because sometimes that can be an exhibit of a symptom of a much deeper problem that's going on, and that's worth reaching out. And I can't tell you how many moms or dads I'll have reach out to me, and I so appreciate it because they're intentional and they're intuitive to what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I also wanted to just kind of share about the sensory and how some of your kiddos are going to be experiencing some of that sensory obsessive behaviors. And so again, putting down these boundaries that don't exhibit shame, that gives them structure, see how that works with them, honor them, and especially with any kind of diagnoses that are going to create maybe some more habitual habits. Just see if you can't implement some new things, reading a book together, sitting together, watching TV, just kind of rubbing the hand, giving them that sensory input that they're needing see how that works. And again, if the boundaries and the sensory input you're giving your child a little bit more, so if that's not working, then it may be time to reach out to a professional.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think if you're in that boat where you've got a sensory seeker at the home or a sensory avoid, like you kind of know,
Yes.
some of those tools or some of those practices already, which can help you just be more mindful of that. We talk about in ETC all the time, like having a sensory rich diet.
Catherine, one thing I just want to highlight that you shared that I think was incredibly valuable, and it's just, I'm really just kind of sitting with it, is how that first suggestion was to replace, that need um, with presence, the presence of that caregiver and that non-shaming, very loving, intentional way of maybe moving them to another activity without it having to even be so clearly said. Like I like that redirection. That's the word that was sort of escaping me.
Yeah,
of redirecting them and getting their needs met. I feel like is just incredibly important. And I know as a parent, that requires, like we talked about at the very beginning, a certain level of self-awareness that if I do see a child doing that self-soothing behavior, I might need to just take a deep breath or two, gather myself, and then start that engagement in a way that is really supportive to the child rather than shaming, or I don't want to project anything onto them. So I so appreciate that. Just meet their needs in some way, or give them the freedom to go into their room. There's nothing wrong with that either. But I definitely do like the parental support component.
And you bring up a great point, because sometimes this can trigger what happened when you were caught self-stimulating.
Right.
And your own shame that maybe took you 30 years into your adulthood to undo and to really repair. And so it is great to be able to, like you said, take that beat and say, how can this be a corrective experience that I didn't get, but that I get to now give? And there's such a repair in that, for sure. So Virginia Satir, and I'll talk more about this when we talk about kind of masturbation. So we're talking about self-stimulation, which is the 4 to 6 year olds. So erotic emotions have not entered into the body. There's no testosterone. And so sometimes we have our own erotic emotions as we, relate to these children. And so that's what hinders us from really connecting with them.
Right.
And so later I'm going to talk about masturbation, which is, older, when there is erotic and fantasy and testosterone. So I'll repeat this quote then, but I want to say it now, is Virginia Satir is an expert on marriage and family. She says, we all need 4 hugs a day to survive. We need 8 hugs a day to maintain, and we need 12 hugs a day to grow. And how often are we doing that to maybe our little ones, especially if you have multiple children in the home, if you have multiple presenting concerns that each child is giving you? Sometimes it's really difficult to provide that affirmation physically to your kid. And so just kind of keep that in mind as a way to feel like you're winning as a parent when you give that child 12 hugs a day.
Well, I'm just thinking, I'm doing like the mental counter right now, and I'm like, oh, I need to pause this and go run and hug some kids real quick. Like that's
right.
Yep.
Well, and is there, so from a psychologist standpoint, some people are going to hear that and go like, oh, hippie stuff. Come on, just talk about the practicality. Tell me what I need to do. Will you explain
You need
more?
to hug. The practical thing is you need to hug your babies.
Exactly.
Will you explain kind of the need behind that quote?
Oh, absolutely. So basically our little kids get plenty of hugs, but our teenagers and our spouses and our partners sometimes don't. And too many of us are really touch deprived. And so when we talk about masturbation older, and I'll just kind of enter in now, a lot of times physical affirmation in the home has gone down big time. Why? Well, because they ridicule us of how we drive, how we we do our hair, what clothes we wear. So they're not really giving the open door for us to want to pursue physical touch, right? To our teenagers.
Yeah.
So there's a depletion of physical touch as teenagers. So what are they doing? They're getting it themselves. And so teenagers are really, really touch deprived. And again, sometimes we resist initiating that because of how they are towards us. But teenagers are still watching us. They're still needing us. Research shows that teenagers want us to be the sex educators for them. And so, again, when you're hugging, you increase the level of oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. It decreases depression and it lowers your blood pressure, and it also reduces your heart rate and can calm anxiety. So there's so many benefits to touch. And it can be easier to do than sometimes having these conversations.
Sure. Yeah. And, Tana, go ahead, because I think you probably have the same thing on your mind that I had on mine. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about this season of COVID and quarantine. Yeah. And I am careful not to overshare our kids' stories. This particular child, I don't think they would mind me saying, sort of diagnosed this past week and said, I think I'm touch deprived because there's not as much peer interaction. So there's not those moments of like side hugs or high fives or just that physical engagement that would sort of happen in that young adult, older teen population. And so I think even more so now that they cannot get physical affection with their peers, there is even more of a need to be providing it intentionally as caregivers, in safe and healthy ways with our kids. I mean, that has proven to be the case. Self-diagnose themselves that way. I think I'm touch deprived, use those words. Yeah. Man. I think you might be now that I think about it, because I haven't been hugging on you in the last couple weeks. So
Right. Well, and so many of us are also just feeling so, claustrophobic or trapped in, and we've just been here for so long. And this is a really helpful reminder. And not everyone's like me. For me, it's really helpful to hear some of the practical stuff that connects emotionally and to hear the science behind it. And when I know the science behind it, I can then remember the importance of it. Because sometimes the emotional stuff, I just think, I'm really nice. They know that I love them. Sometimes I don't feel like hugging them, or sometimes I don't feel like being affectionate. And then if I remember the science, I can go, yeah, but I need to, right? Like it's a need they have. And so that's really helpful.
Yeah. And Tana, something you hit on too with when we're looking at older kids, in terms of like now they're having sexual energy because testosterone has entered their body and all of that. So they have less touch with sports. They have less touch with cheer, with gymnastics, and they also have this sexual energy, right? That God gave them. Okay. Yeah. And so what we once used to say is like, hey, go outside and run some laps, or go lift some weights, or go do something to get that energy off. The worst thing to do is to send a teenager up to their room to be on the computer or to be gaming, because they have that sexual energy and it's going to find itself in some places. And so, but I think, with the sports and not doing after school activities, they're even more touch deprived.
Well, that's going to do it for part one of our conversation with Dr. Blackney about sex. Obviously, as you can hear, there is so much content here, and this material is so great. We didn't want to leave it all in one episode. We wanted to break it up to make it easier to parse through for everybody in this equation. So next week, we will finish the conversation with Dr. Blackney, and I hope that you've enjoyed it so far. As always, if you've got any feedback for us at all, you want to let us know what you loved about it, you want to let us know what you hated about it, please let us know. And especially if you loved it, go ahead and rate that thing and review it on iTunes or on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us be discovered by folks who may need to hear our content. And then if you think of somebody else who would love to hear this, please share it with them as well. But huge thanks to Dr. Blackney, to Tana Ottinger for coming on the show today. Man, really grateful for them, and excited for you guys to hear round 2 next week of our conversation with Dr. Katherine Blackney on how to talk to your kids about sex. Hey, our show is edited and mixed, engineered every week by Kyle Wright, Tad Jewett, brings us his musical stylings every week on the show. And for them, for Dr. Blackney, for Tana Ottinger, and for the whole crew here at ETC, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.